All right, so this week, week 2, descriptive statistics. The goals are located here. Be sure to take a read of those. That's just a summary of what you're going to find when you read the book. And my hope is you already started the book. I have things due on Saturdays to give you Sunday as either a rest day or a day to preview what's to come, like start reading the book there. There's a ton of videos this week that go over everything I'm going to cover in class. And I record these classes in another new playlist that's linked in the syllabus. And then this week for assignments for a grade, you've got the practice problems, which you can repeat over and over again up to the due date, and the quiz, which you get one shot at. Since it is an open book quiz, I only ask a few questions on these quizzes. This time I'm going to put a time limit on it. So once you start the quiz, you have an hour to get it done, and the quiz is based on the reading in the book. And then the application, we're going to do problems like the application starting today, and I'll talk more about that in the next class. So those are the assignments for this week. Let's get busy here. So the idea of a distribution is one to get used to. And so you're going to see this word a lot in the book, the distribution this, the distribution that. And the distribution is basically a graph of the data. The graph is a histogram. We've done a little tiny bit with histograms in terms of bar charts. So we're going to work a little bit more with that today, but just a summary about what that is before we do one. So quantitative data is the main thing we're looking at here today. Quantitative data is numerical. It's something that's measured, counted. And the idea of a histogram is based on a frequency table. And frequency just means count. When we make a frequency table, we group things together. So sometimes you'll see it called a grouped frequency table. And the grouping can happen in a lot of different ways. So first we'll make a frequency table, and then we'll use that frequency table to build a histogram. So all a histogram is a bar chart of a frequency table. It's just a way to summarize the data. So we'll look at a few pre-made ones first, and then we'll take a look at making our own. So the first place I'd like us to go from the useful websites, someplace we'll use a lot. There's a website called StatKey, which accompanies our book. So either you can go navigate over to that page, or I'm going to put this in chat right now. So if you check out the chat, you'll see a link to this page I'm on right here. Main place we're going to play today is one quantitative variable. So if you're viewing this online in the future through YouTube, I'll put a link to this page in the description of the video, which will appear under the video. Check it out. So this right here is a dot plot, and a dot plot is a kind of histogram. It's grouped by individual numbers. So if I point to any one of these here, it's going to tell me what I'm pointing to. So opossum 1. This data set, by the way, is called Mammal Longevity, and descriptions of these data sets are found in the back of the book. This Mammal Longevity, if you've read the book, you'll see that pops up a lot, and so they've looked at this data set several times in the book. There's a mouse that has a 3, a guinea pig that has a 4, and I think my guinea pig is like the longest living guinea pig ever. I think he's almost 7. It's crazy, he just won't die. I think it's because we let him graze in the yard and our cats protect him. Way over here, I have an elephant, which has a longevity of 4, and longevity is average lifespan. Right? Right now, notice the elephant is way out there compared to the others. So, and there's several mammals that have a longevity of 5. There's several that have a longevity of 12 years. Okay? So this is a kind of histogram, and we can see that there's less than 10, maybe there's 9 there. Maybe this is about 7 for the 15 here, and so on. Histogram is a more, but just another kind of grouped display of the data. And when I point to any one of these columns in stat key, you should see on the right bottom here, it says what's the lower and upper bound on here. So for example, this big column right here, if I look in the bottom right corner, it says lower bound is 8.8, upper bound is 12.7. So what the computer's doing here is it's looking at this set of data and it's counting how many of these numbers are between 8.8, oops, and 12.7. When StatKey does that count for us, if a number was 8.8, which is that lower bound in the bottom, it would be counted in this column. 12.7 would end up in the next column. And I'll make a note of that too, because spreadsheets do something similar. We can take control over the histogram right here, and the histogram shows how the data is distributed. So what I can see that between 5 and 15, most of the mammals live in here. There's 8 in this column, 12 in that column, that's 20, and 8 more in this column. So 28 out of the, how many are in this data set? Sample size is 40. So 28 out of 40, almost 3/4, live between 4.9 and 16.6. So that's something about the distribution. 3/4 of the data, 3/4 of these mammals have a lifespan between 4.9 and 16.6. Now, it always defaults to 10 buckets, and the buckets are these columns here. So potentially I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns. And I can always change the number of columns or buckets by just dragging the slider. And notice that the shape of the graph changes a little bit each time I do that. But there are some things that are pretty constant, and that's most of the data is between 5 and 15, right in here. And then I always have this tail out here on the right, regardless of how many buckets I decide to make. Sometimes I like to make buckets that match the number StatKey puts on the bottom here, so I don't have to point to each column to see where they start and end. And so to do that, I go over to set limits, and they're starting at 1. I'm gonna start at 0. So what I do is I pick a nice start and end number, and then choose the number of buckets to split up this distance between the min and max. The distance between the min and the max is called the range there. So here they've labeled 5, 10, 15, 20 at the bottom. So if I wanted every 5 to appear here, that means I would have to take this range, 40 minus 0 is 40, divide by 5 here, 40 divided by 5 is 8. So if I have 8 buckets, and again, I'll write that calculation down in a sec, then things should appear more nice here. 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15. So I'm going to copy this, scribble on it a little bit, and talk about how to choose your groupings here, those frequency groups. Page. This is an example of a histogram. And histograms from StatKey, if you wanted to use them in a Google Doc, if you're writing about some data set, you have to do a screenshot to get it. You can't directly save that image. So I'll talk more about screenshots in a little bit. I just want to label this one right here. What I have here is mammal longevity in years. So we should always have a title at the top. The bottom axis here would be whatever we're measuring, in this case, years. And in this case, the numbers on the side would be the number of mammals that are in each group here. Now, I could call this vertical column here the frequency, but whenever I make a chart, I'm thinking about other audiences besides myself or statistics. And what does frequency mean? Frequency of what? Well, frequency means, what are we counting? We're counting the number of mammals that are in each group. So we want to try to give a pretty descriptive title. So again, I could title this axis count or frequency, but that's kind of lame. Better title in this case would be number of mammals. And these are the years of longevity there. This column right here ranges from 10 to 15. And the way I chose to have these groups right here, so a little note on how to group data for a frequency histogram. I do one of two things. The first thing for sure I do is I figure out what's the max value, what's the min value, and I subtract those. And that's going to give me what's called a range, max minus min. So in this case, I had a max of 40 and I had a min of 1, so my range was 39 years between the shortest living mammal in my list and the longest living mammal in my list. In this case right here, I wanted to take advantage of StatKey's putting a 5 and a 10 and a 15 at the bottom. So I tweaked this a little bit and I said, well, let's make it nicer. Let's go 40 minus 0, which is 40. And then if I divide by 5, if I want the width here of one of these bins to equal 5, then what I do is I just take the range, divide by what I want for a width. So I want a nice width of 5. And that's going to give me the number of columns. So that's one approach I could take. So I took 40, I divided by 5, that gives me 8. And so I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. And sometimes these columns are called buckets. Sometimes you'll see them called bins. Sometimes they're called groups. Let's see, there's a couple other words, categories. And I'm missing another one, buckets, bins, groups, columns. Okay, so depending on what software you're using to make a histogram, you might see a reference to buckets, you might see a reference to bins, you might see a reference to groups or categories. They all mean the same thing. Now, sometimes people go the other way. Like notice in StatKey, when I first started this one, let me just reload this page, it said, let's use 10 buckets. So if we take that 40 minus 1, that's 39, and we divide by 10, 39 divided by 10 would be 3.9, then that's going to be how they're generating these widths. Okay, so again, StatKey by default takes the max, subtracts the min, picks 10 buckets, and so the width would be that range, 39 divided by 10, and so you can see here in the first column, the lower bound is 1. If we add 3.9 to that, we get 4.9. The next column would be 4.9 up to, if we add, let's see, 3.9 to 4.9, what would that be? 8.8, and so there's the 8.8. So that's how it's generating that. So I'm going to show how to do this in a spreadsheet next. And we're going to make a frequency table to go with it so you can see what a frequency table looks like. If you've read the book, you've seen some examples there. So my recollection to you right now would be to have this page up if you don't already. So again, in the chat, I'll repost that. Anyone that just joined us. A strange thing about the chat in Zoom is if you join the meeting late, then you don't see any of the chat that happened before you got there, which is a little bit annoying. So here's that link again if you arrived after I posted it the first time. That would take you to this page here, and then we're looking at one quantitative variable. And what I want to do next is I want to take this data and I want to put it in a spreadsheet to play with it to see how a spreadsheet makes histograms. So I'm just going to, I hit the edit data button. So again, StatKey, one quantitative variable, edit data for the mammals, and just shift down arrow will allow you to copy the whole data set, Control C to copy. Next thing you need to do is get a spreadsheet, and I'm going to use Google Sheets. And I hope that you will do the same. Usually with Google Sheets, I start with my drive. And then from my drive, I make a new spreadsheet. And so sometimes I'll put it in a specific folder. Today, I'm just gonna make a new one and I'll move it later. Hopefully this pastes in nice. And kinda, sorta, I'll show you how to fix this. So I was hoping it would automatically make 2 columns for me. It didn't, but this is what's called a comma separated values file. So notice the name and number of each thing is separated by a comma. So to fix this, I just highlight the column and then data. I want to split text to columns. And once I do that, again, so I gotta highlight the data first, go to the data tab, and then scroll down there till I see split text to columns, and then look at that and say, oh, you have a comma. It's automatically guessing at the separator. If it doesn't guess right, we can pick the separator, and then it will try to split everything. So now it put the longevity in the other column. So sometimes when we copy things from a web page to a spreadsheet, things go great. Other times they don't. Alternate way to get that is their show data. I think this, that didn't work either. Copy it there. Yeah, so it looks like the only way to get the data in there was to edit the data, grab this whole group. So you can use your mouse to do that instead of the arrows. Copy, paste it into the spreadsheet, and then with it highlighted, we just go to data, split text to columns, and the computer should just split them up. If anyone had trouble with that, I'm going to share this with you. So let's get rid of this. Always a good idea to name it. So I'm going to name this, let's see, section 2.2, Mammal Longevity. Actually, I'm just going to call it section 2.2 for now because I might add some other stuff. When you share something in Google, and this happened to a couple of you when I was grading your applications, depending on where your Google account is from, the link may be just restricted. So before you copy that link, you have to first make sure anyone with the link can view it. Once that's set, then copy the link. And so I'm going to paste this here. So if anybody had any trouble getting this data, just go grab mine. And then just a reminder of what happens. Let me bring up a different version of me here. Once you get that link, if you're signed into your Google account, which I should be here, and this is a different Google account, you can see it's got my picture up here on the right. So it says, oh yeah, you're Gary. Then what I would do to edit this is just go to File and make a copy. And I'm just going to leave it as copy for now, but usually I pick a better name than copy of. And then you'll have an editable version of this. Otherwise, this one is view only. And you could go to view only and say, hey, can you give me access to edit this? And I'm probably going to say no, because this is my version and I don't want you messing with it. But I do want you to make a copy of it so you can play on your own. But if I let you edit this, then we'd both be making edits at the same time, and that's going to get a little nuts. Oh, error, didn't want to do it. Let's try one more time. Okay, that time I liked it. All right, so get that data either from StatKey or make your own copy. Get this version of me out of the way here and come back here. So what I'm going to do a couple things here. I want to make a frequency table of this eventually, but for now I'm just going to make a quick histogram, kind of like StatKey did. So to do that, I highlight the whole column. Quick way to highlight a column is from the top, Control-Shift down arrow. You should look for the bottom. And then I just ask Google with this little chart button here to insert a chart. Alternatively, I could go to Insert Chart. Often when I have raw numbers like this, Google says, hey, how about a histogram? And I'm like, yeah, I want a histogram. So it made me a histogram of longevity. I'll make a better title in a moment. And like StatKey automatically decides on how to group the data, Google does too. So Google decided to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups. The group width is 7.5. If you don't like the one Google gave you, then make a new one. One question people ask all the time is, well, how do you make the best histogram? And the answer is there is no best histogram. You just make different ones and decide which one you like. And you're going to decide to like a histogram for a variety of reasons. One, you say, let's get out of here for a second. Boy, that's a good looking histogram. I like it. And I'm busy. I just want to be done. So that could be my histogram. I didn't like the way those numbers didn't match the columns here. So this isn't very human readable in my opinion. So that's when I went over to set limits and I decided to make a different one. And I went from 0 to 40 with 8 groups. And that worked out very nice with the numbers here. It could be you just play around with the slider and say, I like this one, or I like that one, or nope, I like 15 buckets. So there is no best histogram, but there definitely are some bad ones. So this right here is a bad one. You should never have 32 buckets. The usual rule for a histogram, I'm gonna write this down here, we want to aim for 6 to 20 buckets. More than 20 is too many, less than 6 is too few. So go for 6 to 20 groups. And again, those groups are my columns. They're often called buckets or bins or categories. And it turns out there's a ton of different histograms you can make. You just need to pick one. And usually I pick one based on nice numbers and having a reasonable number of columns here. And let's see, I liked 8 starting at 0. So then my groups are nice, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, and so on. All right, so we're gonna do something like that here. To edit this in Google Sheets, once I have a histogram, so if it didn't pick the histogram for you, you just look through the list until you see histogram. And if you point to it, it says, hey, here's the histogram chart. Click it. From there, you go to Customize. Under Customize is the histogram option where we can choose the bucket size. So notice this is a little different than StatKey. In StatKey, they let us pick how many buckets we wanted. In Google, they say, okay, how wide do you want your bucket? Okay, so maybe I want to go with a bucket of 5, like StatKey did. And so here I get 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, and so on, which works out pretty nice. So a slightly different procedure. If you want to change where it starts, like we did in StatKey, then you would have to adjust the horizontal axis and tell it what your minimum value should be. Should your minimum value be 1? In which case it's going to have start at 1 and go every 5. So 1, 6, 11, 16. I like the 0 better. So this is a histogram, looks just like the one in StatKey. One nice thing about histograms in Google Sheets is they're easily copyable. So here I just go copy, and then I can paste it into a Google Doc if I'm writing up a summary of some data. So that's kind of nice. Whereas in StatKey, I have to use my computer's screenshot program. And that's different on a Windows or a Mac or a Chromebook. And I'll post some videos about how to do that on each later. But if you're on a Windows computer like me right now, if you go to the Windows menu and type snip, you'll get either what's called snipping tool, or you get snip and sketch, and they're essentially the same thing. So if I wanted to use this graph right here in a Google Doc to talk about this data set and how it's distributed, then I would have to, from the snipping tool, usually we do a rectangular snip, and then new grays out like this, and then you would just click and drag just the part you want to see. And then for Google Docs, you could just copy this and paste it into a doc. So let's bring up a doc to go with this. So you're going to need to do this for this week's application. And if I copied it, I should just be able to paste it in that way. Sometimes copy and paste doesn't work in certain applications, like the submission box in Canvas, that wouldn't work. So instead, what I would have to do with that snipping tool is I would have to save the file somewhere. Give it a reasonable name, pay attention where you put it, and then I could insert it. So if I were in Canvas right now trying to submit this in a submission box, I would then hit the insert picture button and upload it. And grab the saved file. In Google Sheets, if you want to put a histogram in a doc, then from the 3-dot button, you just choose copy. And then in Sheets, let's put it underneath this one, you just do paste. And then it says, hey, do you want it linked or unlinked? In this case, I'm going to choose to make it linked. And what that means is if I make a change to the chart in the spreadsheet, that change will appear here in my Google Doc, which is kind of nice. That's a good thing in this case because I have shitty labels here and I need better labels. So here, I think I would rather title this Mammal Longevity. In case people aren't familiar with that, like I'm going to show my mom this later. She's like, what's longevity again? You just put in here lifespan. And make a slightly better title. Down here it says longevity, but I want to be a little bit more clear. What is longevity measuring? It's measuring years that go by. And then I needed a label for this over here. So to get that, I'm going to have to go over to the customize titles, and I want the vertical axis. Although this is a count of the frequency, I could put frequency there. But again, the problem with frequency is that a lot of people aren't sure what it means. They could say, oh, it means count. They say, why just say count? Oh, okay, I can say count. But then they may say, well, what are you counting again? So I probably should be more specific. Count of mammals. Now, normally when I'm talking about counting stuff, I might actually say number. So I think an even better title in plain language would be just number of mammals. All right, so now it's a better looking chart. I got a better title at the top. I got a good title at the bottom, good title on the side. If I go back to my Google Doc here, it should say, hey, this has an update available. So I just click reload, and then I get the better version of it automatically. So that works kind of nice together. Whereas this one, I would have to kind of try to find a way to draw on it or around it, which is a little bit of a pain, but it's doable. So I'm just going to leave that there for now. Let's give this a title. All right. So next thing I want to do is I want to make a frequency table. And the reason I want to do that is sometimes instead of the frequency, the number here, we want relative frequency. So like what % of mammals live between 5 and 20 years old? So often we'll present that in a chart. So let's just move this out of the way. And again, if I went over something about how to edit this chart a little too quick, please say, excuse me, I have a question, or put it in the chat. So let's build ourselves a frequency table. So to build a frequency table, you need some summary statistics first, and minimally you need the min and the max on that. So often what I'll do for that is I'll sort my data first from smallest to largest. So highlight all the data. Once it's highlighted, I want to continue it to be grouped. Like I want to know the grizzly bear had 25 years. So I highlight both columns because I have a descriptive column. And then data, sort, range, say, hey, I got a hetero. And I don't want to sort by animal. That's what it's already doing. I want to sort by longevity. And A to Z means smallest to largest. Sort ascending. All right, so I can see 1 is the min, and then the max is 40. So I'm just going to make a little note over the side here. Min 1, max 40. So then I have a range, which equals the max minus the min. So then we have to decide for our frequency table, how do we want to group these? So I need to group the numbers in this list, starting at 1, ending up at 40. And sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, I might pick a more convenient min, like 0. And I could pick a different max if I wanted to. I want to at least get to 40. Sometimes I might pick a nicer number like 50. But I'm going to leave 40 there. Now I'm saying my range is 40. And then let's suppose I want, usually, remember I said before that you should have for groups 6 to 20 groups. So maybe I'm going to go for 6 groups. So if I wanted 6 groups, then I can figure out the width of each group by taking my range and dividing by the number of groups. And so if I wanted 6 columns and I have a range of 40, then each group should be 6.6666 wide. So right, that's not a very nice number for the width. So that means in my frequency table, I would do something like go from 0 to maybe 6.6. And then the next column would be something like 6.7 up to, see if we add another 6.6 to that, what do we get? 12, 13.3 would be the next one, right? That's pretty awkward. I don't like that. So just because I can make a calculation by picking a number of groups and dividing it into the range, I don't always want to go with that number. So I don't like that very much. What if I tried like 7? Still kind of messy, but then I see the number 5 and I say, oh, I like the number 5. Let's go the other way. So I could put a 5 here for the width, and then the number of groups would just be the range divided by the width. And so we just kind of play around with picking the number of groups, figuring out the width, or picking a width, and then the number of groups. So it's just a little division. Either width goes into the range to get the groups, or the groups go into the range to get the width. So I want my frequency table to look like that. That looks better. I want to go the first group from 0 to 5. And the next group would then, now these are all whole numbers here. So the next group would be 6, 10, and then the next group would be what, 10, 11, 15, and so on. Now, I do not want to manually count how many of these are from 0 to 5 and how many of these are from 6 to 10, because I can make a mistake. I want the computer to do that for me. For the computer to do that, what we need to do is only know the largest number in each group. So I'm just going to shift this a little bit. Spreadsheet trick, when you highlight something, notice where you point. Right now I have the arrow. If I go to the edge, I get the hand, which says I can move it. So these right here, I'm going to call my human readable groups. What I need are some groups that the computer can read to get me a frequency table. So I'm just going to call those groups for now. And all the computer wants to know is what's the maximum acceptable number for each group. Okay, so maximum number acceptable here, I'm going to put 5. Then here would be 10. Once I have a pattern of 2 numbers like that, I can highlight and use this magic fill button to go down until I get to my max. So again, repeat that. To have the computer do the frequencies, you need a column of the group maxes. And in this case, 5 is the highest, and then 10 for the next group. Highlight those 2, let go of the mouse, point to that bottom right corner, fill down till you get at least to your maximum number there. Next, to get the frequency, I use the frequency command on the computer. That's pretty straightforward. From the first frequency cell, we just type equals, start typing frequency, and Google, why aren't you? It pops up. Let's say, hey, I know frequency. Weird. Why isn't it doing that for me today? Okay, so usually, hopefully for you, it's saying, hey, you want the frequency command? Mine's misbehaving for some reason. So it should say, hey, I can do frequency. Just tell me what your data is and what the classes are. So a class is just another word for the group or bin or bucket. So frequency, I'll highlight the data, comma, scroll back up, highlight your group maxes. Close parentheses, hit enter. And so then it counts for you. It says, hey, there's 6 numbers from 0 to up to 5. Then after 5 up to 10, there are 8 numbers up from after 5 to 10. And then after 10, which for me is 11 to 15, it stops counting at 15. Now, as far as graphing this goes, if I just graph these two columns together, oops, it's giving me the wrong kind of chart. I don't want a histogram here. I want a bar chart. So that'd be this one right here. And the reason is, I mentioned before, a histogram is a bar chart of a frequency distribution. So we have two options for making them in Google Sheets. One option is to highlight the raw data and say, make a histogram. What Google does in the background is it makes a frequency table like this and then graphs it for you, but it doesn't show the frequency table. Sometimes we need our own frequency table, and I'm about to show you why here. So again, slightly different procedure than before. I'm going to delete that for a moment because I'm not quite ready. Actually, no, let's bring it back. One problem with this graph is, notice at the bottom it says 5, 10, 15, 20. What does that mean? Every number in this column is a 20? The answer is no. That's why I need these human readable groups over here. So I'm going to continue to type those. So what would be next? So let's see, we got a question. Your frequency table gave you different numbers. Okay, so that will happen if you typed something different or if you didn't highlight all of the data. So give me a sec to do this and I'll take a look at that. So the next one would be 16 to 20, 21, 25. So this is important. I don't type the human readable ones until I have made a histogram that I think is good enough looking. So I looked at this and I said, yeah, I like the look of that. That'll work. Once I decide on that, then I start typing these columns. If I don't like the look of this here, then I just choose different group maxes. Like maybe instead I want to go like 4 and then 8, 12, and so on. So if I fill that pattern down, I need to go a little farther to get to 40, right? I get a different looking histogram here. All right, so again, to make this happen, it's this region right here that I'm making the frequency table for. And I have to decide, I'm just going to delete this and start over. I have to decide what the group maxes are. And after a little arithmetic over here or on paper, I decided to go 5, 10, 15, and so on. Once I start that, I don't need to type every one. The computer recognizes when numbers are the same distance apart. So highlight the pattern and fill down. Get at least to your max. So once you're just at or past your max, sometimes you hit it, sometimes you don't, then what you do is you go into the beginning of the next column. So notice I'm in this cell right next to the first group max, and then I start typing the frequency command, FEQ, and Google should pop up with, hey, here's the frequency command. Mine's misbehaving. And the frequency command says you need the data. So then highlight the data from the first number down to the last number, comma. And it wants the classes. The classes are your group maxes. And highlight those. Close parentheses, hit enter, and it will do all the counts. Now, if you're using Excel, Excel doesn't do it the same way. You'll have to see me after class if you want help with Excel. I'm only going to go over Google Sheets in class. So here are my numbers right there. So if anybody's having trouble getting those to work out after the second time, then we'll make an appointment to go over how to do this later. Once you decide if that looks good enough or not, and notice I get this one extra number here. Google always checks to see if there's anything after what you said the max was, in case you missed something. So that's important. That's a 0, that means I went far enough here. To graph this, I just highlight both columns to the last one, but not the 0. And then I say, hey, insert a chart. So there's a little chart button somewhere. And it went for histogram. That's not what I want. Right? Histogram is on raw data. This isn't the raw data. I just want a bar chart. Okay. And if you think that looks reasonable, then good. Delete it. And then type your human readable ones. So I'm going to finish those here. 6 to 30. 31 to 35. 36, 40, and I'm done. So what I want to graph is I want to graph this column along with the frequency column. So to do that, I highlight the frequency column, or the human readable bins first. And actually, I'm going to give that a better name. Let's call that longevity, because that's what those numbers are. So I'm going to highlight the longevity column, let go of the mouse, hold Control, and then highlight the frequency column. So using Control after the first selection allows you to select two unconnected groups. So again, select the first group, Control, select the second group, and then make your chart. And then again, it picked histogram again. I don't want that. I just want a bar chart, in this case, column chart. And then I get my columns here. And it's a little confused. Longevity should not be there. That should be at the top. Somewhere. Use row 2 as header. There we go. So that button needed to be selected. Usually it automatically does that. Okay. And then I have to go in and make better titles. Now, what I wanted here is a relative frequency table, because I can get a frequency table super easy by just using the regular histogram feature. I'm going to do this one more time. I need another column here, so I'm going to insert a column to the right. I can't get rid of these group maxes, because if I do, I'll lose my frequencies. So they got to stay there. I want the relative frequency next. We looked at relative frequency last week. Relative frequency is just a decimal or percent frequency divided by the total. So I need to get a sum down here. How many numbers are there in my list? Count the sample size. So I just want to sum up the numbers above. 40. So for my relative frequency here, I just want to go equals frequency divided by 40. And then Google says, do I'm going to fill that down? Sure, let's fill it down. Whenever you do relative frequencies, you should double check you didn't mess it up by doing a sum there too. So if you do the total relative frequency, that should always be 100%. Equals sum on that. See that those numbers add to 1 or 100%. So often in statistics, we do relative frequency as a decimal. It's nice to make those a percent instead. So I'm going to do the percent version. So what I want is a graph of the longevity data grouped in relative frequencies here. So to do that, highlight longevity, Control, highlight relative frequencies, and however many rows I select here in the first column has to match the number of rows I do there to make this work. So again, highlight your labels, Control, highlight your numbers, and then make a chart. And this time it picked right, made me a column chart. Now I put longevity in the wrong spot, so use row 1 as headers. Interesting. I did use row 1 as headers. Oh, that's bizarre. My Google's being a little weird today. All right, so
there's the term longevity at the bottom of the list. For some reason, when we copied and pasted it, it says if you scroll down, you'll see the word longevity, or at least mine did.
yeah, so delete that if it's on yours. So mine does not have that in there. Oh, the problem is the way you sorted. And this is important. When you do use the sort feature in any spreadsheet, you want to do sort range, and you have to tell it you have a header row. Otherwise, it treats the header as a piece of data and throws it into the sort. We don't want it in the sort. We always want it at the top. So you got to make sure data has a header row is selected before you do sort. So that's how come your longevity ended up at the bottom. You missed that step. Okay, so mine's being weird about my titles I selected. So I'm just going to select the data without the titles. Usually it works just fine, and it gave me a pie chart this time. Interesting. I want a bar chart. All right, so this is what I wanted to have right here. And then the only thing it's missing is better titles. So, oops, wrong one. So again, I put a title, something like Mammal Longevity. And then for some reason it grabbed frequency table there, which I didn't even select, so that's a little weird. Google's reaching. Years, and then vertical, what am I counting? What is this the frequency of? Now in this case I have percentages, so I wouldn't say number of mammals, I would say percent of this title. And then I do a good look, and this is a relative frequency histogram. So if you need a relative frequency histogram, you have to have a frequency table first. The frequency table is a bit of work to make that happen, because you have to decide on how you're grouping. Just give the group maxes. But then if you want other humans to look at it and understand what the heck they're looking at, you need to make these human readable ones. Then we have to turn the frequencies into percentages. So it is quite a bit of work. This is recorded, so you can take a look at it later, and I have other similar recordings already in the playlist. So I'm going to stop here. The next thing we're going to look at are different kinds of distributions. So let's pause a moment. Hello world.